Imagine for a moment holding a map. It is drawn on gazelle skin, dated with perfect clarity to the year 1513. It shows the coasts of Europe, Africa, and the Americas, with a precision that is unsettling for its time. But it is the southern edge of this map that stops your breath, for it depicts a coastline, complete with rivers and mountain ranges, of a landmass we now call Antarctica. The unsettling part is not its presence, but its condition. It is shown entirely free of ice. Science tells us that the Antarctic coast has been buried under a mile-thick sheet of ice for at least the last 12,000 years. So how can a map, drawn only 500 years ago, show a world that has not existed since the dawn of civilization? Where did this impossible knowledge come from? This map is not an answer. It is a question. A single, perfect, and deeply troubling question that hangs in the quiet halls of history. It suggests a crack in the story we tell ourselves, a whisper of a forgotten chapter. Good evening and welcome. I am Mr. H, and this is Mystery History for Sleep. Our purpose here is not to force the door of the past open, but to gently listen at its keyhole. We gather in this quiet space to explore the whispers, the anomalies, and the silences that linger beneath the official narrative of our world. If you find a sense of peace or wonder in these journeys into the unknown, perhaps you might consider becoming a fellow traveler by subscribing to our channel. And if you wish, you may gently press the notification bell so that our future explorations can always find you. Now, let us return to that silence, for it is filled with such impossible whispers. The map of an ice-free world is but one. What if it is not an isolated clue, but a single note from a lost symphony? What if our history is not the straight line we imagine, but a circle? A repeating cycle of immense achievement followed by catastrophic loss. A story that has played out on this planet again and again, far beyond the reach of our recorded memory. Tonight, we delve into a quiet possibility that our Earth has been reset, that entire civilizations vast, complex, and perhaps even more advanced than our own have risen, flourished, and vanished, erased by fire, or flood, or ice. Their cities crushed, their knowledge scattered, their memory surviving only as faint traces, traces like a map that should not exist, traces like myths of a great flood, told in the same haunting tones by cultures separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years. Traces like stone structures built with a precision that baffles modern engineering, erected by people who supposedly lived in the most primitive of conditions. The story of humanity, as written in our books, spans only a few thousand years, but anatomically modern humans have walked this earth for at least 200,000 years. What was happening in that immense silent gap? Were our ancestors simply waiting, living unchanged for unimaginable spans of time, until one day they suddenly decided to build pyramids and chart the stars? Or is that silence not empty at all? Is it instead the quiet aftermath of forgotten worlds? Is it the space between chapters in a book far older and grander than we have ever dared to imagine? Join me now as we step past the edge of the known and begin our descent into the deep, quiet, and mysterious history of a world that may have existed long before our own. The end of the last great ice age was not a gentle spring thaw. It was not a slow and peaceful greening of the world. For those who lived through it, it must have felt like an apocalypse. For 2.5 million years, the planet had shivered in a deep freeze, locking away a third of the world's fresh water in colossal sheets of ice, miles thick. And then, in a geological heartbeat, the world grew warm. The great glaciers began to weep, then to bleed, and then to collapse in a torrent of unimaginable power. Over centuries, the oceans of the world rose by more than 120 meters. They did not just creep up the beaches, they galloped inland, swallowing coastlines, drowning entire ecosystems, and erasing the worlds of those who lived there. The most fertile lands, the richest hunting grounds, the safest harbors of the Ice Age world, all vanished beneath a rising tide. This was not a local flood. This was a global deluge, a great forgetting, an event that wiped the map clean. And if any great civilizations had built their homes along those ancient shores, their memories, their cities, and their names would now belong to the silent deep. Let us descend into that silence together. Our journey begins in the east, in the warm, clear waters off the southernmost island of Japan, Yonaguni. We leave the sunlit world behind and drift downwards into a realm of deepening blue. The noise of the surface fades, replaced by the soft crackle of marine life and the rhythmic sound of our own breathing. The water grows cooler, the light thins to a silver twilight, and then, out of the hazy blue, a shape begins to form. It is not a natural reef, teeming with chaotic life. It is something else, a vast, monolithic presence that seems to push back against the deep. As we draw closer, its features resolve into an impossible geometry. We are floating before a titan of stone, a structure that rises from the seabed like a forgotten altar. We see vast, flat terraces, as wide as highways, stepping up towards the sky. We see walls that meet at perfect 90-degree angles. We see two colossal pillars, standing side by side as if they once formed a gateway. There is a channel, carved deep into the rock, with straight parallel sides, and a formation that locals call the turtle, a stone shape so evocative it seems to demand a name. The entire structure is immense, nearly 100 meters long and 25 meters high. It is a silent stone behemoth, asleep beneath the waves. The mind struggles to understand what it is seeing. One part of our reason, the part that holds the familiar story of the world, offers a calm, geological explanation. It tells us this is sandstone, a rock that naturally shears along straight fracture lines. It speaks of tectonic uplift and strong ocean currents, forces of nature powerful enough to carve mountains. In this story, the monument is a beautiful accident, a trick of light and shadow, a poem written by the slow, blind hand of the earth itself. It is a story of nature's artistry, and nothing more. And yet, another part of us, a quieter, more intuitive part, resists. It looks at the sheer, vertical walls, the deliberate-looking steps, the symmetry of the pillars, and it feels the presence of a mind. The hand of nature, for all its power, is rarely so precise, so concerned with right angles and flat planes. Could the random currents of the sea truly carve a staircase? Could tectonic shearing produce a shape so uncannily like a giant, watching turtle? The questions linger in the deep, as silent as the monument itself. Geology tells us that this rock was last above the waves more than 10,000 years ago, before the Great Melting. If a human hand was involved in shaping this place, then those hands were at work in a time so remote, we are told, that humanity was capable only of chipping flint and hunting mammoths. They were not supposed to be building titanic stone structures. They were not supposed to be creating places that could endure 10,000 years of slumber beneath the ocean. Yonaguni does not offer us answers. It simply rests in the deep blue, a silent contradiction to the story we thought we knew. It is the first ghost of a drowned world. From the quiet titan of the east, our journey takes us westward, across Asia, to the coast of India and the Gulf of Khambhat. Here, the mystery is not one of sight, but of sound. In the year 2001, scientists conducting a pollution survey were scanning the seabed with side-scan sonar, painting a picture of the depths with sound waves. They were expecting to see mud, sand, and the gentle contours of the ocean floor. Instead, their screens lit up with the impossible. 35 meters below the surface, stretching for 9 kilometers, the sonar revealed the distinct geometric patterns of a sprawling city. The acoustic images showed the clear lines of what appeared to be great walls, the grid-like layout of streets and districts, the foundations of massive buildings, and the course of an ancient riverbed that once flowed through it all. It was not a town or a village. The scale was that of a major metropolis, a ghost city larger than any ancient city we have ever found on land, and it was resting at the bottom of the sea. This was a different kind of discovery. Yonaguni is a monolith that we can see and touch, leaving us to debate its origins. This city in the Gulf of Khambhat was a phantom, an echo in a machine, its existence revealed only through technology. But the echo was soon given substance. Dredging operations at the site brought up artifacts from the city's depths. They found tools, pottery fragments, hearth materials, and most hauntingly of all, fossilized human remains. When these objects were brought to laboratories for carbon dating, the results were so shocking that they were initially dismissed. One piece of wood from the underwater city was dated to be 9,500 years old. Let that settle in for a moment. 9,500 years. The oldest cities we know of, the great cradles of civilization in Mesopotamia, are thought to be no more than 6,000 years old. This discovery, if the dating is correct, would rewrite the first chapter of human civilization. It would mean that a vast urban culture existed in India thousands of years before Sumeria, thousands of years before the first cities of Egypt. It would mean that history, as we know it, is wrong. And just as with Yonaguni, the familiar story pushes back. A fierce debate erupted in the scientific community. Some argued the artifacts were not man-made. Others questioned the carbon dating, suggesting the wood could have washed into the sea from an older source. The discovery was so radical, so disruptive to the established timeline, that it became uncomfortable. And so, a quiet silence has fallen around the ghost city of Khambhat. It remains there, in the murky depths, a 9-kilometer-long question mark that official history has chosen, for the most part, to ignore. It is a memory that our current story has no place for. This idea of a great civilization, lost to the sea, is not a new one. It is perhaps the oldest and most powerful myth we possess. It is the story of Atlantis. The tale, first told by the Greek philosopher Plato, describes an advanced and powerful island civilization that, in a single day and night of misfortune, was swallowed by the sea and vanished. For centuries, the story has been treated as a fable, a moral allegory about the dangers of hubris. But what if Plato was not inventing a story? What if he was simply recounting a memory? A memory, passed down through generations, of a real global catastrophe, a real reset that drowned a real world. For a long time, there was no proof that entire cities could vanish so completely. But then, off the coast of southern Greece, we found one. We found Pavlopetri. Just 3 to 4 meters beneath the surface of the Mediterranean lies a perfectly preserved Bronze Age city. It is not a ruin of scattered stones. It is a complete, intact town. Divers can swim along its streets, past the foundations of houses, courtyards, and administrative buildings. They can identify temples and a central plaza. They have even found dozens of stone-lined tombs. The city is so clearly planned, so organized, that archaeologists have been able to create a perfect three-dimensional digital reconstruction. Pavlopetri is approximately 5,000 years old, one of the oldest submerged cities ever found. It is a miniature, real-life Atlantis. Its existence proves, without question, that sophisticated coastal settlements could be, and were, lost to the sea. Pavlopetri was drowned by a combination of rising sea levels and land subsidence. It is a snapshot of a process that has happened time and again throughout history, and it forces us to ask a crucial question. Pavlopetri is 5,000 years old, resting in shallow water. What else might be waiting in deeper water, on coastlines that were drowned much earlier? What might be sleeping on the continental shelves that were submerged 10,000 years ago when the great ice sheets melted? Pavlopetri is not the exception, it is the precedent. It is the physical proof that the foundation of the Atlantis myth is real. Our ancestors lived by the sea, and the sea sometimes took their worlds away. Let us rise back to the surface now, and put these 3 ghosts into perspective. Yonaguni, the silent monument that defies a simple explanation. The city of Khambhat, a sonar phantom that challenges the very timeline of civilization. And Pavlopetri, the proven, tangible reality of a drowned city. They are not 3 isolated mysteries. They are 3 parts of a single, coherent story. The story of the 25 million square kilometers of land that was swallowed by the oceans at the end of the last ice age. An area of land equal to the entire continent of North America. This was not barren wasteland. These coastal plains were the richest, most fertile, most desirable places to live in the Ice Age world. To assume that humanity ignored this prime real estate, to assume that all of our ancestors chose to live only in the highlands that would one day become our coastlines, is to assume they were nothing like us. We are a coastal species. Today, the vast majority of our great cities sit by the sea. It is far more likely that our most ancient ancestors did the same. And if they did, then their greatest cities, their most sacred temples, their most populous settlements, are now all resting in the silent dark, beneath the waves. We are a species with a profound amnesia, searching for our origins on the land that was left behind, while the heart of our ancient world lies drowned and forgotten. The ocean, then, is more than just an ocean. It is a tomb, it is a museum, and it is the keeper of the quiet, deep, and waterlogged secrets of the worlds that came before our own. If the drowned ruins beneath the waves are the ghosts of a forgotten world's body, then the maps we are about to explore are the ghosts of its mind. For knowledge, once created, does not simply vanish. It can linger. It can hide in the margins of newer texts, be copied by scribes who do not understand what they are preserving, and surface centuries later, like a strange flower blooming in an unexpected garden. There is a term for such things, an out-of-place artifact. But these are more than mere artifacts. These are out-of-place ideas. They are glimpses into a forgotten science, a complete and startlingly accurate understanding of the world that should not have existed in the time it was recorded. Our journey into this phantom archive begins not in a dusty tomb, but in a palace. The year is 1929. In the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, a group of historians is cataloguing the collection of the old Ottoman library. Among the scrolls and texts, they find a fragment of a world map, drawn on a piece of gazelle skin. It is signed by an Ottoman admiral and cartographer named Piri Reis, and it is dated to the year 1513. At first, it appears to be just another beautiful, if somewhat incomplete, map from the great age of exploration. It shows the familiar coastlines of Western Europe, North Africa, and the eastern coast of Brazil. But as the scholars looked closer, a deep and unsettling mystery began to unfold. The map was not a product of Piri Reis's own explorations. He had written as much in the map's margins. In a series of detailed notes, the admiral explained that this was not an original work. Instead, he had compiled it from a great number of older source charts. About 20 of them, he wrote. Some had been captured from Spanish and Portuguese explorers. Others were far more ancient, sourced from the Great Imperial Library of Constantinople, maps that he claimed dated back to the time of Alexander the Great, and some, he hinted, from sources that were older still. Piri Reis was not a discoverer in this instance. He was a curator. He was assembling the scattered pages of a lost atlas. And on one of those pages was a depiction of something impossible. South of the coast of Brazil, the map showed a landmass that continued eastward. For decades, this was interpreted as a strangely distorted representation of the South American coastline. But in the 1950s, a cartographer from the United States Navy named Arlington Mallory was examining the map. He was a specialist in ancient maps, and he saw something that others had missed. He realized that this was not a distorted South America. This was a near-perfect depiction of the coast of Antarctica. Specifically, the coast of Queen Maud Land, one of the northernmost and most well-known sectors of the frozen continent. This conclusion was, and remains, profoundly disturbing. Antarctica was not officially discovered until the year 1820. How could an Ottoman admiral in 1513 have mapped it? But the mystery runs far deeper. The coastline on the Piri Reis map is shown without any ice. It depicts the actual subglacial landmass, the bays, the inlets, and the river mouths that lie buried today beneath a kilometre of solid ice. According to modern geological science, the last time the coast of Queen Maud Land was free of ice was at least 6,000 years ago, and most likely closer to 12,000 years ago, before the end of the last ice age. The logical mind, the part of us that holds the official story, immediately searches for a rational explanation. Perhaps it is all just a wild coincidence. Perhaps Piri Reis was simply filling in the bottom of his map with a mythical land, the terra australis incognita that so many ancient philosophers had theorized must exist to balance the continents of the north. Perhaps the resemblance to Queen Maud Land is just a projection, a trick of the eye. This is the simple, comfortable explanation. It allows the map to remain a curiosity, but not a contradiction. And yet, the quiet questions remain. If it were a fantasy, why is it so accurate in the parts we can verify? If it were a coincidence, how did that coincidence extend to specific bays and river estuaries that match modern seismic soundings of the subglacial coast? The map is not a dreamlike fantasy. It is a work of sophisticated cartography, made with a precise and complex map projection that seems to show the globe as if viewed from a single point high up in space. The admiral himself tells us he was copying older sources. The true mystery, then, is not Piri Reis. The mystery is the source of his information. The ghost is not the map itself, but the lost world of knowledge from which it was copied. A world where someone, somehow, had mapped the coast of Antarctica when it was free of ice. If the Piri Reis map were the only one of its kind, we could perhaps file it away as an unsolvable enigma, a single ghost. But it is not alone. In the great archive of impossible knowledge, there are other pages. Let us turn now to the year 1531, just 18 years after Piri Reis created his chart. A French mathematician and cartographer named Orontius Phineas produced a stunning, heart-shaped map of the world. And there, at the bottom of the map, is a vast southern continent, circling the pole, labelled Terra Australis, the southern land. Its shape is immediately recognizable to the modern eye. It is Antarctica. The disturbing thing is that Phineas drew this decades before the continent was even proven to exist. But what he drew upon its surface is what transforms this map from a curious speculation into a profound mystery. Like the Piri Reis map, the Orontius Phineas map depicts an Antarctica largely free of ice, especially around its coasts. But it does more. It shows mountains near the coast, and rivers flowing from those mountains down to the sea, carving their way through the land. It shows a clear and defined coastline, with fjords and inlets, particularly in the areas we now know as the Ross Sea and the Weddell Sea. For centuries, this was dismissed as pure fantasy. Then, in the International Geophysical Year of 1958, a team of scientists conducted the first comprehensive seismic survey of the Antarctic continent. They used modern technology to send sound waves through the immense ice sheet, creating a picture of the land buried beneath. What they found was astonishing. They found that under the ice, there are indeed mountains. There are indeed rivers, or rather, the frozen beds of ancient rivers. And these subglacial features match, with an unsettling degree of accuracy, the very same features drawn by Orontius Phineas on his map over 400 years earlier. The coincidence has now become a pattern. Two of the most respected cartographers of the 16th century, working in different countries, both produced maps of a continent that would not be discovered for another 300 years, and both drew it in a state that has not existed for thousands of years, complete with geographical features that we only confirmed with 20th century technology. The ghost is no longer whispering, it is beginning to speak, and it is telling us that the knowledge of the ancient world was profoundly different and profoundly more advanced than we have ever been led to believe. This pattern does not end there. It forms a lineage, a tradition of impossible knowledge passed down through the centuries. The great Gerardus Mercator, the man who invented the map projection that we still use today, included a detailed Antarctica on his world map of 1569. Where did this meticulous geographer, a man known for his scientific rigor, get this information? Even more startling is the map created by a French cartographer named Philippe Buache in 1737. This was still nearly a century before Antarctica's official discovery. Buache's map is, in many ways, the most shocking of them all. He drew the continent not as a single landmass, but as two large islands, separated by a wide, clear sea channel running from the Ross Sea to the Weddell Sea. At the time, this was considered a bizarre error, but the seismic survey of 1958 proved Buache right. Underneath its unified ice sheet, Antarctica is not one continent. It is an archipelago, dominated by two main landmasses, separated by a subglacial basin exactly where Buache had drawn his sea. Buache himself stated that he had compiled his map from much older sources, which he had studied in a naval archive in Paris. Sources that were, in his words, concealed. Let us pause and consider what this lineage implies. We are no longer talking about a single, out-of-place artifact. We are talking about a coherent and consistent body of knowledge, a lost science of cartography, preserved in secret and passed down through generations. This knowledge was so powerful and so accurate that it allowed the greatest mapmakers of the Renaissance to draw a continent they had never seen in a state it had not been in since before the dawn of history. To understand the true magnitude of this, we must understand the sheer difficulty of mapping the ancient world. Determining latitude, your position north or south, is relatively simple. You can do it by observing the stars. But determining longitude, your position east or west, is a monstrously complex problem. It requires you to know the exact time at your home port and the exact time at your current location simultaneously. To do that, you need a clock that can keep perfect time on a rocking ship through changing temperatures and humidity. You need a marine chronometer. The problem of longitude was the greatest scientific challenge of its age, and it was not officially solved until the late 1700s with the invention of John Harrison's chronometer. And yet, the source maps that Piri Reis, Phineas, and Boache were copying were drawn with precise longitudes. They had to be. You cannot map a continent that spans the entire globe at its base without knowing longitude. This means that the civilization that created the original maps had solved the problem of longitude thousands of years before we did. They possessed a technology, a combination of sophisticated astronomical knowledge and precise timekeeping devices that we believe was impossible for the ancient world. They had to have undertaken a systematic, global survey of the planet. We stand, then, in the heart of a phantom library. The books have all crumbled to dust. The authors are nameless. The civilization that built it is a ghost, but here and there, a page has survived, copied by a careful hand and inserted into a newer volume. These impossible maps are those pages. They are echoes from a world that did not guess at its own geography, but measured it. They are the undeniable evidence that before our age of discovery, there was another. The people of that forgotten age did not just explore the world. They mapped it, all of it, with a science that we are only now beginning to recognize as our own. Their knowledge was not lost forever. It was simply waiting, sleeping in an archive, a quiet ghost in the machine of history. There are stories that belong to a single village, a single tribe, a single time. They are born, they are told for a few generations, and then they fade, like embers from a dying fire. And then there are other stories that do not seem to belong to any one people, because they belong to all people. Stories so ancient, so persistent, and so widespread that they seem less like inventions and more like memories. Dreams that our entire species has been dreaming together since the dawn of time. Of all these shared dreams, one is more powerful, more detailed, and more haunting than any other. It is the story of the Great Flood. It has been found in every corner of the inhabited world. Over 500 distinct versions of this one, single narrative have been recorded, from the frozen north to the deserts of Australia, from the mountains of Asia to the jungles of the Amazon. For a long time, the familiar story was of Noah, a tale preserved in the book of Genesis. But Noah's story is a relatively recent telling of a much, much older memory. To hear the original voice, the first whisper of this global dream, we must travel back in time, back to the sun-baked plains of ancient Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. And we must listen to the story of a man named Utnapishtim. His testimony is recorded on clay tablets, in the cuneiform script of the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest surviving works of literature in the world. Utnapishtim was a king, living in the ancient city of Shuruppak, a city so old that even by the standards of ancient Sumeria, it was a place of myth. One night, the god Ea, the lord of wisdom and the waters, came to him in a dream, but he did not speak to Utnapishtim directly. He spoke to the reed walls of the king's hut, a clever way to bypass a divine law that forbade the gods from speaking with mortals about the coming disaster. Reed hut, wall, wall, the god whispered. Listen, reed hut, and pay attention, wall, man of Shuruppak, son of Ubara, Tutu. Tear down your house and build a boat. Abandon possessions and look for life. Despise worldly goods and save your soul. Tear down your house, I say, and build a boat with specific dimensions. Let her width and length be equal. Cover her with a roof, like the Apsu, the watery deep. The warning was clear. The other gods, in their anger at humanity's noise, had decided to wipe the slate clean with a flood that would destroy all of mankind. Ea, in an act of divine rebellion, had chosen Utnapishtim to preserve the seed of life. The instructions that followed were not the vague warnings of a fable. They were the precise, technical specifications of an engineer. Utnapishtim was told to build a great vessel, a perfect cube, with 7 decks, each divided into 9 compartments. He was to gather workers, to slaughter bullocks and sheep for them each day. He was to load the boat with vast quantities of bitumen and pitch to waterproof its hull. And then he was to load his cargo, his family, his craftsmen, and as he says in his own words, the seed of all living things. He brought wild animals from the steppe and domestic animals from the fold onto the great ship. When the time came, the storm arrived with a terrifying supernatural fury. The sky went black. The storm god Adad thundered from above, and the gods of the abyss, the Anunnaki, raised their torches, setting the land ablaze with their lightning. The storm was so violent that even the gods themselves were frightened. They fled to the highest heaven, cowering like dogs. For 6 days and 7 nights, the wind blew, and the deluge swept over the land. On the 7th day, the storm subsided. Utnapishtim opened a hatch and looked out. The world was silent. All of humanity had been turned back into clay. The landscape was flat and empty, like a vast, featureless roof. His boat had come to rest on the peak of a mountain called Nisir. He waited for 7 more days. Then, he began to test the world. He sent out a dove. The dove flew away, but finding no place to land, it returned. He sent out a swallow. The swallow, too, returned. Finally, he sent out a raven. The raven flew off, saw that the waters had receded, found food, and it did not return. Utnapishtim knew that the world was ready to be born again. Listen to that story. Listen to its texture, its detail. This is the oldest version of the flood story we have ever found. Now, let us leave ancient Sumeria, and let that story echo across the world. The first echo is the divine warning. In Sumeria, the god Ea whispers to the wall of a reed hut to save his chosen one. Now, travel across the continent to ancient India. In the sacred texts of the Shatapatha Brahmana, the sage Manu is washing his hands in a river when a tiny fish swims into them. The fish begs Manu to save it from the larger fish in the river. Manu does so, and the fish grows at an astonishing rate. It is Matsya, an avatar of the great god Vishnu, and it has come to warn Manu of a coming flood that will destroy everything, and to instruct him on how to build a great ship to survive it. Travel now to ancient Greece. The Titan Prometheus, the friend of mankind, looks down from the heavens and sees that the god Zeus is enraged, planning to destroy the men of the Bronze Age with a great flood. Prometheus defies Zeus. He descends to his son, Deucalion, a just and honourable man, and warns him of the coming catastrophe, instructing him and his wife Pyrrha to build a wooden chest, an ark, to save themselves. The pattern is immutable, a secret warning, a divine betrayal, a single chosen family. The next echo is the vessel of survival. Utnapishtim builds a 7-decked ark, waterproofed with pitch, to carry the seed of all life. In the Hebrew tradition, the patriarch Noah is given almost identical instructions. Build an ark of gopher wood, with many rooms, and cover it inside and out with pitch. Load it with his family, and with 2 of every kind of animal. The parallels are so exact that for centuries it was assumed the Hebrew story was simply a later version of the Mesopotamian one. But the echo does not stop there. Cross the Atlantic Ocean to the Americas. In the Aztec traditions of ancient Mexico, the god Tezcatlipoca warns the man Nata and his wife Nena that a great flood is coming. He instructs them to hollow out a huge cypress tree, and to take with them only 2 ears of maize, one for each of them. In the traditions of the Mandan people of North Dakota, there is a story of a great deluge that was survived by one man, Nu-Moch-Makana, who built a huge wooden barricade, or big canoe, to save himself and the last remnants of his people. From the Middle East to Mesoamerica, the solution is always the same: a specially constructed vessel, a technological answer to a natural disaster. The final, and perhaps strangest, echo is the detail of the birds. Utnapishtim, stranded on Mount Nisir, sends out a dove, a swallow, and a raven to find dry land. This specific, peculiar detail seems almost too random to be a universal archetype. And yet, it appears again. Noah, in his ark, sends out a raven, which flies to and fro. Then he sends out a dove, which returns. He sends it out a second time, and it returns with an olive leaf in its beak. The third time, the dove does not return. In the mythology of the Anishinaabe people of the Great Lakes region of North America, their hero, Nanabozo, survives a great flood on a raft with a few animals. To find land, he sends a loon to dive into the depths. The loon fails. He sends an otter. The otter fails. Finally, he sends a beaver, which dives and returns with a small clump of earth in its paw, from which Nanabozo recreates the world. Why this detail? Why birds? Why this specific method of determining if the world is safe? It is a strangely pragmatic, almost scientific detail embedded in a myth, a story of scouting and reconnaissance. When confronted with this global chorus of echoes, the logical mind presents two possibilities. One is diffusion, the idea that the story originated in Mesopotamia and then spread across the world over thousands of years, changing as it went. The other is coincidence, the fact that floods are a common natural disaster, and so different cultures simply invented similar stories to explain them. But these explanations begin to feel thin when you consider the sheer number and specificity of the parallels. The divine warning, the chosen family, the vessel of salvation, the preservation of animal life, the survival on a mountaintop, and the sending out of birds. Is it truly plausible that these precise plot points could be reinvented by coincidence, or survive a journey of diffusion across every continent without losing their core structure? Let us consider a third possibility. What if the Great Flood story is not a story at all? What if it is a memory, a distorted but persistent memory of a real event? And what if it is something more? What if it is a highly compressed instruction manual, a blueprint for surviving a planetary-scale disaster, encoded in the robust and easily memorable format of a myth? Consider the structure. First, a warning system. You are told a disaster is coming by a higher power. Second, a technological solution. You are given specific instructions to build a survival craft. Third, a biodiversity directive. You are commanded to preserve the genetic material of the planet's life forms. Fourth, a post-cataclysm protocol. You are shown a method for determining when it is safe to re-enter the world. It is a perfect, four-step guide to rebooting civilization. It is a story designed not just to be told, but to be used. This may sound like speculation, but there is a final, crucial piece of the puzzle. The memory is real because the flood was real. As we saw in the drowned worlds beneath the ocean, the end of the last ice age unleashed a cataclysm. Modern geology has identified specific moments of terrifyingly rapid sea level rise. One of these is known as Meltwater Pulse 1A, an event that occurred around 14,600 years ago. Over a period of about 500 years, the sea levels rose by as much as 25 meters. That is an average of 1 meter every 20 years. For anyone living on a coastal plain, it would have been an incomprehensible world-ending deluge. It was not a single wave, but a relentless, generational crisis, a slow-motion apocalypse where the entire world, as they knew it, sank beneath the waves. The story of the Great Flood, then, is the human face of this geological event. It is the testimony of the survivors. It is the collected memory of 1,000 different peoples, all trying to make sense of the time when the water came and took everything. This is why the dream is the same everywhere, because the trauma was shared by everyone. These stories, then, are the most precious inheritance we have. They are not fables of angry gods. They are the songs of the survivors. They are the memory of our own astonishing resilience. They are the first and greatest story we ever told ourselves, and its message is simple. The world has ended before, but we are still here. And in the telling of the story, in the preservation of the memory, our ancestors left us a quiet whisper of hope, a blueprint for how to endure, should the waters ever begin to rise again. If the memory of the drowned worlds is kept by the ocean, and the memory of their science is kept in the phantom archives of ancient maps, then the memory of their spirit, their power, and their deepest beliefs is kept by the stone. When a civilization fears that its time is coming to an end, when it senses a great forgetting on the horizon, it does not write its final testament on paper or hide it on scrolls. It seeks a language that can withstand the flood and the fire. It seeks the language of eternity. It speaks in stone. Across the world, there are structures that seem to be more than just buildings. They feel like messages. They are so old, so massive, and so inexplicably complex that they seem to have been built not for the people of their own time, but for us. They are libraries of stone, time capsules of granite and diorite, designed to survive a planetary reset and carry a warning, a promise, or a history into the far future. The only problem is that we, the intended recipients of these messages, have forgotten how to read the language. Our attempt to decipher this language begins in the highlands of southern Turkey, at a place called Göbekli Tepe. For thousands of years, this place was nothing more than a gentle, rounded hill on the horizon, known to local shepherds as the Potbelly Hill. It was considered a natural feature of the landscape. But in the 1990s, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt began to excavate the hill, and what he unearthed did not just change our understanding of a single period in history, it shattered the entire timeline of human civilization. Buried beneath the Potbelly Hill was a vast ceremonial complex, a series of circular enclosures made of immense, T-shaped pillars of limestone. These are not crude, uncut stones. They are elegant, stylized forms, some standing over 5 meters tall and weighing up to 50 tons. They are arranged in circles, like giant figures gathered for a silent, eternal meeting, and their surfaces are covered in the most exquisite and mysterious art. We see parades of animals, carved in high relief with incredible skill: foxes, lions, gazelles, scorpions, spiders, and snakes. We see vultures, often depicted carrying human heads, and strange, abstract symbols whose meanings are now completely lost to us. The site is breathtaking in its beauty and its complexity, but what makes Göbekli Tepe the most important archaeological discovery of our time is its age. Scientific dating has confirmed, without question, that this temple complex is 12,000 years old. Let us pause to absorb the meaning of that number. 12,000 years old. This is more than 7,000 years before the Great Pyramid of Giza. It is 6,000 years before Stonehenge. It is a date so ancient that it precedes the invention of pottery, the invention of writing, the domestication of animals, and even the dawn of agriculture itself. According to the story we have always told ourselves, the people of that era were supposed to be simple, nomadic hunter-gatherers. They lived in small, mobile bands, following herds of wild animals, with no permanent settlements, no complex social structure, and no technology beyond chipped stone and wood. They were not supposed to be capable of this. The official story, faced with this impossible fact, has had to rewrite itself. The current theory is that Göbekli Tepe was a kind of cathedral on a hill, a central religious site for the scattered hunter-gatherer tribes of the region. They would travel for great distances to gather here, to worship, and to feast. And, the theory goes, the immense, coordinated effort required to build this place over many centuries is what forced them to innovate. It spurred them to develop new social structures, and eventually to invent agriculture in the surrounding valleys in order to feed the workforce. In this new telling, it was the desire to build a great temple that created civilization itself. Religion, it seems, came first. And this is a beautiful and compelling story, and yet, the quiet questions linger, as persistent as the ancient stones themselves. How did small, scattered bands of nomads, with no known leaders or architects, conceive of such a sophisticated architectural plan? How did they organize a workforce large enough to quarry 50-ton pillars from a nearby hillside, transport them, and erect them with such care? Where did the complex, unified system of symbols and animal carvings come from? Göbekli Tepe does not appear at the end of a long, slow tradition of smaller, simpler buildings. It appears in the archaeological record suddenly, fully formed, as if from nowhere. What if we have the story completely backwards? What if Göbekli Tepe is not the beginning of something new, but the end of something old? What if this was not a temple built by primitive hunters, but a memorial, an archive, built by the survivors of a highly sophisticated lost civilization? Imagine a global cataclysm, like the one suggested by the end of the last ice age. Imagine a world destroyed, its cities drowned, its knowledge lost. A small group of survivors, holding on to the last vestiges of their ancient science and social organization, could have built this place. They would have built it not as a simple place of worship, but as a message, a book of Genesis written in stone. Its carved animals could be a zodiac, a map of the constellations as they were in that distant age. Its purpose could have been to preserve their knowledge of the cosmos, a warning about the great cycles of time that had just destroyed their world. This idea is strengthened by one of the site's greatest mysteries. After being used for over 1,000 years, the entire complex was deliberately and carefully buried. Ton by ton, the circular enclosures were filled in with earth and debris, entombing the great pillars and preserving them perfectly until our own time. Why would anyone bury their own cathedral? Unless their goal was not to destroy it, but to protect it, to turn it into a time capsule, to transform their stone library into a hill, so that its message might survive the long, dark age that they knew was coming. If Göbekli Tepe is the first, symbolic volume in our stone library, our next journey takes us to its most technically baffling textbook. We travel from the old world of Anatolia, across the ocean, to the new world, and climb 14,000 feet into the Andes Mountains of Bolivia. We have come to the high, windswept plateau of the Altiplano, a place of thin air and brilliant, unrelenting sunlight. And here, scattered across the plain, are the ruins of a place called Pumapunku. To call Pumapunku a ruin is an understatement. It looks like a divine workshop that was destroyed by a fit of cosmic rage. Immense, precision-cut stone blocks lie scattered and broken, as if a giant child had built something of impossible beauty and then smashed it to pieces. But it is not the scale of the destruction that is the primary mystery here. It is the nature of the blocks themselves. The stones are made of andesite and diorite, two of the hardest and most difficult to work stones on the planet, second only to diamond in their durability. And they have been shaped with a precision that, by any conventional understanding of history, should be impossible. We see blocks, known as H-blocks because of their shape, that are all identical, as if they were mass-produced from a mold. Their surfaces are perfectly flat, to within fractions of a millimeter. Their corners, both external and internal, are perfect right angles. Most inexplicable of all are the series of small, evenly spaced holes drilled into channels within the stones, and the complex, interlocking joints that look less like the work of stonemasons and more like the work of a master woodworker. These stones were designed to fit together without mortar, locking into place like a three-dimensional puzzle, so perfectly that you cannot fit a razor blade between them. The official story tells us that Pumapunku was built by the Tiwanaku civilization around the year 500 AD, and that they accomplished all of this using the simple tools available to them: stone hammers, bronze chisels, and sand and water for polishing. We are asked to believe that with these primitive tools, they achieved a level of precision that a modern engineer with laser-cutting tools would struggle to replicate. And once again, the quiet question arises: how? How do you create perfectly flat surfaces on diorite with a stone hammer? How do you carve complex internal right angles with a bronze chisel that is barely harder than the stone itself? The marks on the stone are not the rough, pitted marks of pounding and grinding. They are fine, smooth, and uniform, consistent with the use of high-speed machine tools. This is not a matter of patience or manpower, it appears to be a matter of technology. What if, like the builders of Göbekli Tepe, the Tiwanaku were not the originators, but the inheritors? What if they discovered these ruins, already ancient in their own time, and revered them, incorporating them into their own ceremonial center? What if the impossible blocks of Pumapunku were the work of a much older, more advanced civilization, one that possessed a technology that allowed them to shape stone with an ease we cannot comprehend? The sheer violence of the site's destruction also speaks not of a simple earthquake, but of a cataclysm of almost unimaginable force, one that could toss 20-ton blocks of solid stone around like pebbles. Pumapunku feels less like a temple, and more like the shattered remains of a machine, its purpose and its creators long since vanished into the silence. From the fine-boned precision of Pumapunku, our final journey into the stone library takes us to a display of pure, Cyclopean power. We travel north, to the mountains above the ancient city of Cusco, in Peru. Here, guarding the approach to the old Inca capital, are the fortress walls of Sacsayhuaman. The walls are built in a stunning zigzag pattern, running for hundreds of meters along the hillside, and they are constructed from some of the largest stones ever moved by human hands. The smaller blocks weigh 20 to 30 tons. The larger ones weigh over 100 tons. One stone in particular is estimated to weigh 150 tons, the weight of about 100 cars. These are not simple rectangular blocks. They are complex polygonal shapes. Some have 8 sides, some have 10, some have 12 or more, and each one is fitted to its neighbors with the same baffling, mortarless precision we saw at Pumapunku. The questions here are almost too immense to grasp. First, how did the builders quarry and transport these stones from a source several miles away, across a river and up a steep mountainside? The official story suggests an army of 20 to 30,000 men using nothing but ropes, ramps, and levers. But even with modern technology, moving a 150-ton object through that terrain would be a monumental, almost impossible, undertaking. But the second question is even more profound. How did they shape these complex, multi-sided blocks so that each unique surface fit perfectly against its neighbors? And there is a strange quality to some of the stones. They almost look as if they were soft when they were put in place, molded to fit the contours of the stones around them, and then hardened into rock. Some of the stones show signs of vitrification, as if they were subjected to an intense heat that melted their surface. When the Spanish conquistadors first saw these walls, they refused to believe they were the work of humans. They attributed them to demons. The Inca people themselves, when asked, gave a disarmingly honest answer. They said that they did not build the great megalithic sections of Sacsayhuaman. They claimed it had been built by a race of giants, in a time long before their own empire. What if they were telling the literal truth? What if the Inca were simply the last in a long line of cultures to inhabit this sacred site, building their own much smaller, simpler stone structures on top of the Cyclopean foundations of a world that was ancient even to them? What if a lost technology, one that could perhaps soften or manipulate the very structure of stone, was at work here? Göbekli Tepe, Pumapunku, Sacsayhuaman, 3 volumes in a library of stone scattered across the globe. One is a book of cosmology, a story of the stars. One is a textbook of engineering, demonstrating a mastery of form and material. And one is a great epic poem, a display of power over mass and gravity. They are not silent. They are speaking a language of defiance, a language that insists that the past was grander, more intelligent, and far more capable than we have ever been taught. We are standing in their library, but we have forgotten how to read. They are the patient, permanent, and profound messages from the worlds that came before. If the great stone libraries of the ancient world are the books of a lost civilization, then the objects we are about to examine are its footnotes, its appendices, its technical manuals. They are not grand statements of power or cosmology. They are small, intricate, and often overlooked. They are the gears and wires of a forgotten age. Imagine a world erased, a vast and complex society, wiped clean by a great cataclysm. In the aftermath, almost everything is gone. The great buildings have crumbled. The libraries have turned to dust. The people and their memories have vanished. It is a cold case, a mystery so old that the scene of the crime is the entire planet. But even in the most complete destructions, something is sometimes left behind. A single, anomalous clue, buried in the wreckage, often misidentified, and holding a secret that can change everything. Tonight, we become forensic investigators of the deep past, examining a series of these quiet, impossible clues. Our first case file opens in the year 1901, in the turquoise waters of the Aegean Sea. A team of Greek sponge divers is sheltering from a storm near the small island of Antikythera. When the storm passes, they dive, and they stumble upon the remains of an ancient Roman shipwreck, 45 meters below the surface. Over the next year, a difficult and dangerous recovery operation brings a treasure trove of artifacts to the surface: beautiful bronze and marble statues, glassware, and fine pottery. And among the treasures, there is a piece of what the divers assumed was junk, a corroded, shapeless lump of bronze and wood, about the size of a large book, which was logged and sent to the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, and then, for the most part, forgotten. For decades, this lump sat in storage, a casualty of a 2,000-year-old disaster. Then, in the 1950s, a historian of science began to study it. He noticed that the lump had split apart, and within the corroded layers, he could just make out the faint, unmistakable outline of a gear wheel. This was the first clue. But the technology to investigate further without destroying the fragile object did not yet exist. The case went cold again. It was not until the dawn of the 21st century, with the advent of advanced X-ray and high-resolution computed tomography scanning, that a team of international scientists was finally able to perform a forensic examination. They placed the corroded fragments into their advanced machines, and for the first time, they were able to peer inside the lump, to digitally reconstruct what lay hidden within. And what they found was so shocking, so far outside the known history of technology, that it has been called the most important archaeological discovery of the 20th century. The corroded lump of bronze was a machine, but it was not just any machine. It was a device of almost unbelievable sophistication. Housed within a wooden case, with inscriptions on its front and back faces, was an intricate system of at least 37 interlocking bronze gear wheels. Some of these gears were connected in complex, differential arrangements that scientists had believed were not invented until the 16th century. These gears drove a series of pointers on the front and back dials, creating what can only be described as a portable, mechanical cosmos. This was an astronomical computer. By turning a hand crank on its side, an ancient user could predict, with stunning accuracy, the position of the sun and the moon against the zodiac. It showed the phase of the moon. It could predict solar and lunar eclipses decades in advance. It even had a dial that tracked the 4-year cycle of the ancient Pan-Hellenic Games, including the Olympics. It was a clockwork universe that you could hold in your hands, and it was made 2,100 years ago. The official story, the accepted narrative, holds that the Antikythera mechanism is a testament to the lost genius of the ancient Greeks. It is seen as the absolute pinnacle of Hellenistic engineering, a masterpiece created by a culture that gave us geometry and philosophy. And then, the knowledge was simply lost during the decline of the Roman Empire and the subsequent Dark Ages. This is a plausible, and in many ways a satisfying explanation. And yet, the detective's quiet hunch, the nagging question, remains. A technology this complex does not spring into existence from nowhere. It is the product of a long tradition. Just as you cannot build a modern smartphone without first inventing the telegraph, the radio, and the transistor, you cannot build a differential gear system without a long history of simpler gear systems, of trial and error, of lesser prototypes. Where are all the other, simpler Greek computers? Where are the fragments of the less advanced machines that must have come before this one? In over a century of archaeology, not a single one has ever been found. The Antikythera mechanism is a technological orphan. It is a Boeing 747 found in a world that has only ever known how to build hot air balloons. What if the story is not that the Greeks invented this, but that they were the last ones who knew how to make it? What if this device is not the pinnacle of their technology, but the last surviving heirloom of a much older, more widespread technological tradition, a tradition that was almost entirely wiped out in a previous reset? The Antikythera mechanism may not be the first chapter in the story of complex machines. It may be the last sentence of a previous volume, a final, brilliant spark before the knowledge was extinguished for 1,000 years. From the complex world of mechanical computation, our investigation now leads us to a much simpler, but in some ways, even more profound clue. We turn to case file number 2, the Baghdad Battery. The object was found in 1936, during an excavation of a village near Baghdad, in modern-day Iraq. The artifact itself is humble. It is a small terracotta pot, about 15 centimeters high. Sealed inside its mouth with an asphalt plug is a cylinder made of a rolled-up sheet of copper, and suspended in the very center of this copper cylinder, insulated from it by the asphalt, is an iron rod. The artifact was dated to the Parthian period, somewhere between 250 BCE and 225 AD. For a long time, its purpose was a complete mystery. Then, after the Second World War, an engineer from General Electric named Willard Gray was examining the object. He saw the two different metals, the iron and the copper, insulated from each other. He recognized the design. He built a replica of the ancient pot, and he filled it with a simple acidic electrolyte grape juice, a substance readily available in ancient Parthia. The result was immediate. The humble clay pot produced a steady electrical current of between 1 and 2 volts. It was a functional wet cell battery. This discovery has been the subject of intense debate ever since. The mainstream archaeological view is that the object's electrical properties are a complete coincidence. It is argued that it was most likely a storage vessel for sacred scrolls, and the metal components were simply part of the container's design. After all, they argue, there is no other evidence that the ancient Parthians used electricity for anything. No wires have been found, no light bulbs, no motors. And yet, the quiet questions nag at us. Why this specific and chemically perfect design? Why the precise combination of iron and copper, two metals ideal for creating an electrochemical reaction? Why the careful insulation provided by the asphalt stopper? Every single component is exactly where it needs to be to function as a battery. If its purpose was not to create electricity, then this is one of the most remarkable coincidences in the history of archaeology. But what if it was not a coincidence? What if the Parthians did have a use for a low, steady electrical current? One of the great arts of the ancient Middle East was gilding, the process of coating cheaper metals like copper or silver with a thin, beautiful layer of gold. The most efficient and effective way to do this is a process called electroplating, which uses a gentle electrical current to bond the gold to the base metal. Archaeologists have found many finely electroplated artifacts from this period, but have never been able to fully explain the technique used to create them. What if this simple clay pot is the missing piece of that puzzle? What if a practical, simple form of electricity was not a modern invention, but a secret, ancient craft, used by artisans to create objects of beauty? The Baghdad battery may be a clue that our ancestors had harnessed a fundamental force of nature in a small and subtle way, 2,000 years before Alessandro Volta reinvented the battery in the year 1800. Our final case file takes us from a small, tangible object to a large, cryptic image, from a potential power source to a potential application. Our investigation now leads us to Egypt, to the magnificent temple of Hathor at Dendera. Deep beneath the main temple, there is a series of underground crypts, their walls covered in stunningly preserved hieroglyphs and reliefs. And on one wall, in the darkest, most inaccessible part of the temple, is a scene that has baffled Egyptologists for generations. The relief carving depicts several large, elongated, bulb-like objects. Each one has a stem at its base that looks like a lotus flower, which is in turn connected by a long, thick cable to a rectangular box. Inside each transparent bulb, a long, wavy snake is shown, its head at one end, its tail connected to the lotus flower. The entire apparatus is being held up by human figures, and it is clearly the focus of a sacred ritual. To the modern eye, the resemblance is uncanny and immediate. The scene looks, for all the world, like a depiction of a giant, primitive form of electric light. The bulb-like shape is the glass envelope, the lotus flower is the socket, the long cable is the electrical wire, the box is the power source or generator, and the snake, the most mysterious element, is the glowing filament inside. The official Egyptological explanation is that this is a purely symbolic image from Egyptian creation mythology. In this interpretation, the bulb is the celestial womb, the primordial space from which the universe is born. The lotus flower is the symbol of creation. The snake is the serpent god Harsomptus, representing the energy of the rising sun, born from the lotus at the dawn of time. It is, we are told, a beautiful and complex religious diagram, not a technical one. The reason there is no soot on the ceilings of the inner tombs and crypts, they explain, is that the Egyptians used a complex system of mirrors to reflect sunlight into the dark, or burned very high-quality olive oil that produced almost no smoke. And yet again, the nagging questions return. While the mythological explanation is plausible, it does not fully account for the strangely technical appearance of the objects. Why the thick, detailed cable connecting the womb to the box? Why is the box itself attended to by a figure holding what appear to be knives, as if operating a switch? And the problem of the soot remains. Even the purest olive oil, burned for thousands of hours by the armies of workers needed to carve and paint these tombs, would leave some kind of faint chemical residue. The ceilings of many of these chambers are perfectly clean. What if the image is both? What if it is a religious scene depicting a sacred technology? What if the ancient Egyptian priests possessed a form of electrical illumination, a gift from the gods, used to light their most holy and secret places? The Dendera relief might be a clue hidden in plain sight, a schematic for a lost machine, its true meaning disguised as a myth to protect the sacred knowledge. The Antikythera mechanism, the Baghdad battery, the Dendera light. 3 case files from our cold case archive. One shows a mastery of mechanical computation, one hints at a practical knowledge of electrochemistry, and one depicts the possible application of electrical light. They are all from different cultures and represent different branches of science, but they all point in the same direction. They are the forensic clues that build a profile of a lost world. A world that was not just one of monumental builders, but of brilliant inventors. A world whose technology was not our technology of silicon and steel, but a forgotten science of bronze and chemistry. These quiet, humble artifacts are the gears and wires of that lost age, the proof that the story of invention is not a straight line, but a great repeating circle. We have journeyed beneath the waves to find the bodies of drowned cities. We have entered the phantom archives to read the minds of their forgotten cartographers. We have listened to the shared dream of a world washed clean by water, and we have stood in the stone libraries built by those who survived. In all these stories, the agent of destruction, the force that triggered the Great Reset, was nature, a rising ocean, a shifting climate, the slow and inexorable grind of deep time. But there is another, darker possibility, a whisper that suggests that at least one of the resets was not an accident. It was a choice. What if a civilization, in a previous cycle, did not simply fall? What if it committed suicide? What if the most terrifying ghosts of the past are not trying to tell us how they died, but are trying to warn us not to follow their example? This is not a story of a natural disaster. It is a story of a war so vast, so technologically advanced, and so utterly devastating that it burned a world to ash and deliberately erased its own memory. To hear the voice of this ghost, we must travel again to the ancient world of India and open the pages of one of humanity's most profound and epic poems, the Mahabharata. This is not a simple collection of myths. At over 100,000 verses, it is the longest poem ever written, a foundational text of Hindu culture that is seen by many not as a fable, but as a genuine, if highly poeticized, history of a real and cataclysmic war that took place in a remote golden age. It tells the story of a great conflict between 2 rival families, the Pandavas and the Kauravas, and in its telling, It describes the weapons that were used in this war, and the descriptions are, to the modern ear, deeply and chillingly familiar. Listen to the words used to describe the deployment of a weapon called the Brahmastra, a weapon gifted by the gods. A single projectile, charged with all the power of the universe, an incandescent column of smoke and flame, as bright as 10,000 suns, rose in all its splendor. It was an unknown weapon, an iron thunderbolt, a gigantic messenger of death, which reduced to ashes the entire race of the Vrishnis and the Andarkas. The corpses were so burned as to be unrecognizable. Hair and nails fell out, pottery broke without apparent cause, and the birds turned white. After a few hours, all foodstuffs were infected. The text goes on. It describes how, to escape this fire, the soldiers threw themselves into rivers to wash themselves and their equipment. It describes a searing heat that scorched the earth, made the trees go up in flames, and caused elephants to run in terror. It speaks of a weapon that, after its use, was followed by cruel winds, churning clouds, and a sky that seemed to rain blood. For years afterward, the land was barren, and the survivors suffered from terrible sores upon their skin. Let us pause and leave the world of ancient poetry and enter the world of modern physics. In the year 1945, at a test site in New Mexico, the first atomic bomb was detonated. The lead scientist of the project, J. Robert Oppenheimer, watched the explosion, and as the great, terrifying mushroom cloud rose into the sky, he famously recalled a line from another Hindu text, the Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." The parallel is not just in the poetic sentiment, it is in the forensic detail. The ancient text of the Mahabharata, written down thousands of years ago, provides a near-perfect, step-by-step, non-technical description of the effects of a thermonuclear explosion. The incandescent column of smoke and flame, as bright as 10,000 suns, is a perfect description of a mushroom cloud. The iron thunderbolt that reduces an entire race to ashes speaks of a weapon of mass destruction. The descriptions of hair and nails falling out, of food being poisoned, of soldiers needing to wash themselves in rivers, are all uncannily accurate descriptions of the effects of acute radiation sickness and radioactive fallout. The description of a land made barren for years is the description of a nuclear winter. The logical mind, the voice of the official story, tells us that this is all just poetic hyperbole, that the ancient bards who composed this epic were simply describing the most powerful conventional weapons of their time: arrows, swords, siege engines, in the most dramatic and imaginative language they could conceive. It is a story, and nothing more. And yet, the quiet, insistent question remains. How could their imagination, thousands of years before the discovery of nuclear fission, so perfectly and so sequentially describe its unique and horrifying effects? It is one thing to imagine a big fire or a powerful explosion. It is another thing entirely to imagine the invisible poison of fallout, the specific biological effects of radiation sickness, and the long-term contamination of the food supply. These are not intuitive concepts. They are the unique and terrible signature of a single modern technology. What if the poets of the Mahabharata were not imagining? What if they were remembering? What if they were the inheritors of a story passed down by the traumatized survivors of a real atomic war that devastated their world in a previous age? A ghost story is one thing, but a true haunting requires physical evidence, a scar left upon the land. Does the earth itself remember this forgotten war? Our investigation now takes us to the Indus Valley in modern-day Pakistan. Here lie the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro, one of the principal cities of that great, enigmatic civilization. It was a city of stunning sophistication, with meticulously planned, grid-like streets, advanced sanitation systems, and a population of tens of thousands. And then, around 1900 BCE, it was suddenly abandoned. The entire civilization collapsed, and its memory vanished for almost 4,000 years. When archaeologists rediscovered and excavated the city in the 1920s, they found a disturbing scene. They found skeletons of men, women, and children lying in the streets, unburied, often found in groups, sometimes holding hands. They were not killed in battle. There were no signs of weapons or armor. They were simply caught in the open, as if a sudden, terrible doom had swept through the city in an instant. Some of these skeletons, when tested, were found to contain levels of radioactivity as much as 50 times higher than normal background radiation. But the most compelling and controversial evidence lies in the city's structure itself. At several locations within the ruins, archaeologists found clusters of pottery, bricks, and stone that had been fused together into a solid, glass-like mass. They had been vitrified. To turn rock and clay into glass requires a sudden, intense burst of heat in excess of 1,500 degrees Celsius, or 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit. This is a temperature far hotter than what can be produced by a normal house fire or even a large-scale city fire. It is the kind of temperature produced by an industrial blast furnace or by the thermal flash of an atomic explosion. The official story provides alternative explanations. The skeletons are the result of disease or a final, desperate massacre, and their radioactivity is the result of natural deposits in the surrounding soil. The vitrification, they argue, is the result of an intense industrial accident, perhaps a pottery kiln that suffered a catastrophic meltdown. These are all plausible, isolated explanations. And yet, the quiet question returns. What if these are not isolated phenomena? The evidence of vitrification is not unique to Mohenjo-Daro. All across the world, there are strange scars on the land. In Scotland, Ireland, and France, there are dozens of ancient hill forts, their stone walls melted into glassy slag. In the deserts of Libya, Egypt, and the Gobi, there are vast fields of mysterious green glass, chemically pure and almost identical to the trinitite glass that was created in the sands of New Mexico during the first Trinity atomic test. Mainstream science explains these away as the results of lightning strikes or natural airbursts from comets or meteorites. But what if they are all connected? What if the voice of the Mahabharata, the radiated skeletons of Mohenjo-Daro, and the glassy deserts of the world are all chapters in the same terrible story? The story of a global, technological civilization that unleashed a power it could not control. A civilization that could wage such a war would need more than just a powerful weapon. It would need an advanced delivery system. And here, too, the ancient texts of India provide another, haunting ghost. They speak of the Vimanas. These are not the horse-drawn chariots of the gods. The texts, such as the Vaimanika Shastra, describe them in startlingly technical detail. They speak of flying machines made of special light metals. They describe their propulsion systems, sometimes mentioning mercury vortex engines. They speak of their ability to fly vast distances, to hover, to become invisible, and most ominously, to carry destructive weapons. They are, for all intents and purposes, the ancient equivalent of aircraft and spacecraft. The mainstream view is that these texts are not ancient at all, but modern channelings, imaginative fictions from the early 20th century. And perhaps they are, but they represent a persistent cultural idea, a memory of a time when men flew in shining ships and waged war from the skies. They are the memory of the bombers that may have carried the iron thunderbolts. This, then, is the darkest of all the reset scenarios. It is not a story of our world being undone by the impartial forces of nature. It is the story of a world undone by its own inhabitants. It is the story of a choice, the story of a civilization that reached the same technological precipice where we now stand, a civilization that unlocked the power of the atom and chose to use it for destruction. The great forgetting that followed was not an accident. It may have been a necessary penance, a global amnesia required to allow life to begin again. The ghost of this forgotten war is not just a mystery of the past. It is a mirror. It is a cautionary tale, whispered to us across the ages, a warning from a version of ourselves that failed the great test. The memory haunts us not to condemn us, but to remind us that the power to create a golden age is inseparable from the power to create a radioactive wasteland, and the choice of which world to build is, and perhaps always has been, our own. The reset button is not always in the hands of the cosmos. Sometimes it is in ours. We have assumed, so far, that this forgetting was a natural consequence of catastrophe, that the knowledge of the previous world was shattered, its fragments scattered, its memory almost entirely lost to the winds of time. But tonight, we will explore a different, and perhaps more unsettling possibility. What if the forgetting was not total? What if the destruction was not absolute? What if, in the smoking ruins of a former world, a small and dedicated group of survivors managed to save not just their own lives, but the very essence of their civilization, its knowledge? And what if, in the long dark age that followed, they came to a momentous decision, that this knowledge was too powerful, too dangerous to be released back into a primitive and traumatized world? What if they decided that humanity had to begin again, but that the core of the old wisdom had to be preserved, in secret, until the world was once again ready for it? This is the story of the Keepers of the Flame. It is the secret history of a river of knowledge that did not dry up after the great cataclysm, but simply went underground. For thousands of years, it has flowed in the darkness, through hidden channels and secret reservoirs, invisible to the civilizations living on the surface. Its guardians have passed the sacred trust from one generation to the next, preserving the memory of a world that was, while carefully curating the world that is. In the immediate aftermath of a global reset, the world would be a terrifying place. The survivors would be few, scattered, and living in a state of primitive survival. In this new world, anyone who still possessed the knowledge of the old one, the ability to predict the movements of the stars, to engineer with stone, to understand the principles of agriculture, or to heal the sick, would not be seen as a scientist or an engineer. They would be seen as a magician, a miracle worker, a god. They would become the first priests, the first shamans, the first kings, and the knowledge they carried would itself be transformed. It would be veiled in allegory and ritual. Practical, repeatable science would become sacred, secret doctrine. Geometry, the tool used to survey the earth and build great cities, would become sacred geometry, a mystical language of divine proportion. Astronomy, the science of charting celestial bodies for navigation and understanding the cosmos, would become astrology, the art of divining the future from the heavens. Chemistry would become alchemy. This was not a corruption of the knowledge, it was its salvation. By disguising science as religion, the first keepers created a protective shell around it. They ensured it would be preserved with devotional accuracy and passed down only to carefully chosen initiates, those who had proven themselves worthy of the secrets. We see the legacy of this in the great priestly castes of the ancient world, the priests of ancient Egypt, who held the mathematical secrets required to construct the pyramids, the Brahmin priests of India, who preserved, through oral tradition alone, some of the most complex mathematical and astronomical knowledge of the ancient world, all encoded within their sacred verses. They were the first guardians of the underground river. As the millennia passed and new civilizations rose and fell, this river of knowledge had to find new, more sophisticated channels to flow through. The old priesthoods faded, but the tradition of initiation and secrecy continued. It flowed into the mystery schools of ancient Greece and Egypt. The Pythagoreans, for example, were not just a school of mathematics. They were a secretive brotherhood who believed that the universe was built upon a hidden language of number and harmony, a knowledge they guarded jealously. And from these ancient schools, the torch was passed into the shadows of our more recent history. It was passed to the secret societies that have operated just beneath the surface of Western civilization for centuries. Of these, none is more famous or more mysterious than the Order of the Freemasons. Their official history begins in the Middle Ages as a guild for the stonemasons who built the great cathedrals of Europe. But their own allegorical history, the story they tell their initiates, traces a lineage far, far older. They claim to be the spiritual descendants of the builders of King Solomon's temple, and before them, the master craftsmen of Hiram of Tyre, and before them, the great architect priests of ancient Egypt. The language of Freemasonry is the language of symbols, the square and compass, the all-seeing eye, the twin pillars of Boaz and Jachin. To the outside world, these are allegorical tools for teaching morality. but in the context of a secret history, they take on a profound new meaning. The square and compass are not just the tools of a common builder, they are the symbols of the sacred geometry that built the entire world, a lost physics based on harmony and proportion. The all-seeing eye, often depicted atop an unfinished pyramid, is not just a symbol of God, it is the symbol of an enlightened consciousness, the pinnacle of a science of the mind that has been lost. The twin pillars represent not just the entrance to a temple, but a gateway to a lost world of knowledge. What if the Freemasons, and other societies like them, were not just guilds of builders, but the secret inheritors of a blueprint for civilization itself? The Knights Templar, the warrior monks of the Crusades, are another channel for this river. It is whispered that during their long occupation of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, they were excavating beneath the ruins of Solomon's temple, and what they found was not gold or silver, but something far more valuable: scrolls, texts, the preserved knowledge of a forgotten age. This secret knowledge, it is said, is what gave them their immense wealth and power, and what ultimately led to their brutal suppression by the Church and the kings of Europe, who wanted that knowledge for themselves. This brings us to a different kind of keeper, not a secret society that hides in the shadows, but a vast and powerful institution that operates in plain sight. What if the greatest single repository of knowledge from the world before the reset is held in the one place that has had the power, the continuity, and the motive to both collect and conceal it? The Vatican. Beneath the splendor of St. Peter's Basilica lies the Vatican's secret archives. The scale of this collection is almost impossible to comprehend. It contains over 85 kilometers of shelving, holding documents that span more than 12 centuries of human history. Officially, it is the State Archive of the Holy See, containing papal correspondence, state papers, and historical records. But its oldest sections are shrouded in complete secrecy. The early Christian Church, in its rise to power, walked a fine line. It was an agent of preservation, with its monks painstakingly copying the classical texts of Greece and Rome, saving them from the chaos of the Dark Ages. But it was also an agent of destruction, systematically burning and suppressing countless pagan and heretical texts from across its empire. The quiet conspiratorial question is this: what was the true definition of a heretical text? What if some of these forbidden books were not just the writings of rival religions, but were scientific, historical, and philosophical texts from the antediluvian world, knowledge from the world before the flood? What if the Church, in its mission to create a new story for humanity, a new history that began with its own divine revelation, collected and concealed any and all evidence of the cycle that came before? What if, in those 85 kilometers of shelving, there are maps that show the world as it was 15,000 years ago? What if there are technical diagrams of forgotten machines and historical records of the kings and empires of a world that we are told never existed? The knowledge would not have been destroyed, but quarantined, deemed too dangerous and too contradictory to the new narrative of the world to ever be released. If this underground river of knowledge truly exists, then it cannot stay hidden forever. Occasionally it must bubble up to the surface. And there are moments in history where this seems to have happened. The most dramatic of these is the Renaissance. History tells us that the Renaissance was a sudden, explosive flowering of genius in Europe, sparked by the rediscovery of classical texts. But was that all it was? How did this era produce so many polymaths, individuals like Leonardo da Vinci, whose notebooks are filled with designs for flying machines, submarines, and military tanks, centuries before the technology to build them was thought possible? The secret history offers a different explanation. The Renaissance was the moment when the keepers of the flame decided to begin a controlled re-release of the lost knowledge. They leaked fragments of the old science in mathematics, in medicine, in architecture, in art back into the world through chosen initiates and brilliant minds. Da Vinci was not just a singular genius. He was perhaps a man who had been given a glimpse into a forgotten library. This would explain the sudden leap forward, the sense that the Renaissance was not just an invention but a reawakening, a remembering. This, then, adds a final, chilling layer to our mystery. The great forgetting after the reset was not entirely an accident of nature, and the great reawakening of science and exploration was not an accident of history. Both may have been part of a long, carefully managed plan. A plan conceived by a handful of survivors in the dawn of our current cycle, and carried out in secret by an unbroken chain of guardians for 12,000 years. In this story, history has a hidden hand on its tiller. And we, the inhabitants of the modern world, are not the brilliant discoverers we believe ourselves to be. We are simply students, being allowed to remember our lessons, piece by piece, on a schedule set by teachers we have never seen. The deepest mystery is not what was lost in the cataclysm. It is what is still, to this day, being deliberately kept from us. In all of this, the story, for all its strangeness, has remained a human one. It has been a tale of our own lost greatness, our own self-destruction, our own carefully managed rebirth. It rests upon a single foundational assumption that we have always been alone. But tonight, we will let go of that assumption. We will introduce a new, and perhaps final, variable into the grand equation of our past. We will ask the most profound and unsettling question of all: what if we have never been alone? What if the cycles of reset, the preservation of knowledge, and the entire drama of human history has been influenced, guided, or perhaps even directly managed by a non-human intelligence? What if the keepers of the flame were not just the survivors of a human civilization, but the emissaries of a cosmic one? To explore this idea, we must return to the most ancient stories of all. In almost every culture, across every continent, the dawn of civilization is not depicted as a slow human invention. It is described as a gift. The arts of agriculture, the principles of law, the mysteries of writing, the science of astronomy, and the skills of architecture are not struggled for. They are given to us by the gods. The gods descend from the heavens, and they teach a primitive, often terrified humanity how to become civilized. We have always read these stories as myths, as religious allegories, but let us conduct a quiet thought experiment. Let us reread these ancient accounts, but with a single simple substitution. Let us replace the word God with the word visitor. Suddenly, these sacred texts are no longer stories of the divine. They transform into something that sounds unnervingly like contact reports. Listen again to the voices of ancient Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization. Their myths, the oldest we have ever found, speak of the Anunnaki, a name that literally means those who from heaven to earth came. These were not ethereal spiritual beings. The texts describe them as physical beings who piloted celestial vehicles, who lived for thousands of years, and who engaged in politics, warfare, and science. They came to Earth, the stories say, and finding the planet rich but untamed, they genetically engineered a primitive hominid to create a worker race, Homo sapiens. Mankind, in the Sumerian telling, was created to be the servant of these gods from the sky. The story of our beginning is the story of their arrival. Now, travel across the world to the Americas. The legends of the Andes and Mesoamerica are haunted by the memory of a pale-skinned, bearded teacher named Viracocha, or Quetzalcoatl. He was not a local god born of the mountains or the jungle. He was a stranger who arrived from the sea, in a vessel that moved without paddles. He was a scientist and an engineer. He taught the people mathematics, astronomy, and the precise stoneworking that allowed them to build their megalithic cities. He gave them the foundations of their civilization, and then he departed across the ocean, promising that one day he would return. He was a god who was also a visitor, a teacher from another place. Even the texts that form the bedrock of the Western world contain a version of this story. The non-canonical Book of Enoch, a text once considered scripture but later excluded from the Bible, tells the story of the Watchers. These were a group of 200 angels who descended from the heavens to Mount Hermon. They saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they made a pact to take them as wives. They interbred with humanity, creating a race of giants. But they did more than that. They violated a divine law by teaching humanity forbidden knowledge. They taught the secrets of metallurgy for the forging of weapons, the art of cosmetics, the knowledge of astrology and the reading of the stars. This act of forbidden teaching, the story says, is what corrupted humanity and filled the world with a violence so great that it had to be cleansed by the Great Flood. In each of these stories, the pattern is the same. A non-human intelligence descends from the sky. It interacts directly with humanity, and it imparts a world-altering technology or knowledge. Read as myth. These are stories of our relationship with the divine. Read as contact reports. They are the story of our relationship with an advanced, extraterrestrial civilization. If we allow this possibility to enter our narrative, then the entire concept of the reset is transformed. The great cataclysms may not be random acts of nature, or even solely the result of human folly. They may be deliberate. They may be controlled events. Imagine the Earth not as a chaotic world, but as a garden, a vast and complex ecological and civilizational experiment. And imagine these visitors as the gardeners. They plant the seeds of life, or perhaps just the seeds of intelligence. They watch as it grows. They occasionally intervene to teach, to guide, to nurture. But sometimes a garden becomes overgrown. A species becomes too dominant, too destructive. An experiment goes in a dangerous or unforeseen direction. What does a good gardener do? He does not abandon the garden. He prunes it. He weeds it. He sometimes must clear a section and start again to preserve the health of the whole. In this chilling new perspective, the Great Flood was not an act of divine anger. It was an act of cosmic gardening. A controlled planetary-scale sterilization of the experiment, a reset designed to cleanse the garden after the forbidden knowledge of the Watchers had led to chaos. And the chosen survivors, the Utnapishtims, the Vimanas, the Noahs, were not just lucky. They were selected. They were the hardiest seeds, the most promising genetic and cultural stock, carefully preserved by the gardeners to be replanted after the cleansing was complete. The gods who gave them the blueprints for the ark were the gardeners themselves, managing their experiment through a controlled reset. This idea, as fantastic as it sounds, is not without its own strange, quiet clues. The story of our past may not only be written in stone and myth, but in our very blood. The mystery of the H-negative blood type is a persistent anomaly. Its origins are unknown, and it is distributed unevenly among the human population. In fringe theories, its unusual properties and the health complications it can cause in pregnancy are seen as a faint biological echo of an ancient genetic intervention, a marker of a bloodline that was once mixed with something not entirely of this earth. And the anomalous knowledge we have already examined takes on a new light. Consider the Dogon people of Mali, in Africa. Their traditional cosmology, recorded by French anthropologists in the 1930s, contains breathtakingly advanced knowledge of the Sirius star system. The Dogon knew that Sirius, the brightest star in our sky, was not one star but two. They knew of its tiny, invisible companion star, Sirius B, a white dwarf so dense and so faint that it was not photographed by Western astronomers until 1970. The Dogon knew its 50-year orbital period, and they knew that it was incredibly heavy. Their legends are unequivocal about the source of this impossible knowledge. It was given to them, they say, by the Nomo, amphibious gods who came to Earth from the Sirius system thousands of years ago. The stone libraries of Göbekli Tepe and Pumapunku can also be reread. Were their celestial alignments merely tracking our sun and moon? Or were they pointed towards the home stars of their builders? Were they constructed by human survivors alone, using the last remnants of their own technology? Or were they built with the guidance, and perhaps the tools, of the gardeners who had just reset the world? The official story, of course, provides rational explanations for all of this. The gods are simply personifications of nature. The advanced astronomical knowledge is the result of thousands of years of patient, naked-eye observation and a brilliant oral tradition. The parallels in myths are the result of the common structures of the human mind. These are the stories of humanity's own genius. And yet, the quiet, cosmic question insists. The consistency of the ancient story is haunting. The descent from the sky in a shining vehicle, the imparting of the arts of civilization, the interbreeding with humanity. the promise of a future return. Is it truly easier to believe that every ancient culture on Earth, independently, invented the same complex and strangely specific fable about their origins? Or is it, in a strange way, simpler to believe that they were all describing a shared, real, and world-altering experience? If we accept this final, radical layer of our secret history, then our own existence is reframed in a way that is both humbling and terrifying. It suggests that our greatest triumphs may not be entirely our own. Our journey from the cave to the cosmos may have been guided. It also suggests that our failures are not entirely our own. The great resets may not have been our fault, but the result of a decision made for us, by an intelligence whose motives we cannot begin to comprehend. We are not the masters of our own house. We are children, living in a home built for us by parents we have never met. The silence of deep time, in this final telling, is not the silence of our own forgotten ancestors. It is the silence of the vast, cold space between the stars. It is the silence between us and our creators, our gardeners, our gods. It is a silence that we have filled with myths and religions, because the true story, the story of ourselves as a cosmic experiment, is a truth too vast and too lonely to bear. We have walked through the quiet ruins of our planet's secret history. We have listened to the ghosts of drowned cities, of impossible technologies, and of forgotten wars. The story we have pieced together is one of cycles, of great rises and catastrophic falls, a story that whispers of a humanity far older and more advanced than our own. It is a story built from myth, from anomalous artifacts, and from the quiet questions that linger in the margins of the official record. But now, we must leave the realm of myth and shadow and bring this profound possibility into the cold, clear light of modern science. For in our own time, in our quest to understand our future, we have inadvertently developed the very tools we might need to find the ghosts of the deep past. As we study the climate of our own planet, and as we search for signs of life on others, we have learned to ask a new kind of question. If a civilization like our own had existed on Earth in a time before humanity, a time so remote that all its cities, machines, and bones have turned to dust, what, if anything, would be left? What kind of fingerprint would a ghost leave on the geological record of a planet? This is the question at the heart of a thought experiment known as the Silurian hypothesis. The name is a playful nod to a classic science fiction story, but the question is a serious one, posed by two leading scientists, Gavin Schmidt, the director of the NASA Goddard Institute for Space Studies, and Adam Frank, an astrophysicist from the University of Rochester. Their question is simple and profound. If an industrial civilization existed on Earth millions of years ago, could we detect it today? The immediate answer is, almost certainly not in the ways we might imagine. Over a span of millions of years, the surface of our planet is a relentlessly destructive engine. Plate tectonics would subduct entire continents, carrying cities and ruins down into the molten mantle. Erosion would grind mountains into sand. Glaciation would scrape landscapes clean. The chances of finding a fossilized factory or a petrified skyscraper are so infinitesimally small as to be practically zero. A civilization's physical body would be erased completely. So, to find them, we must look for a different kind of trace. We must look for the chemical ghost that an industrial civilization would leave behind, a scar buried not in history, but in geology. We must look for the civilization's global footprint, and we know what that footprint looks like, because we are creating one ourselves, right now. The first and most obvious fingerprint would be a sudden and massive spike in carbon released into the atmosphere from the burning of fossil fuels. This spike would alter the planet's climate, and the carbon itself, with its unique isotopic signature, would be absorbed by the oceans and buried in seafloor sediments. A future geologist, millions of years from now, could drill a core sample and see this event clearly, as a thin, dark band in the rock, a momentary fever in the planet's long history. Another fingerprint would be the sudden appearance of new, unnatural materials. A thin layer of plastic polymers, or persistent industrial chemicals, or even unusual metallic alloys, could be preserved in the sediment. creating what scientists now call a techno-fossil layer. Furthermore, an industrial civilization, through agriculture, would need to produce fertilizer on a massive scale by fixing nitrogen from the atmosphere. This process leaves a distinct nitrogen isotope signature in the rock record, a sudden sign of life manipulating the planet's fundamental chemical cycles. And finally, the changes brought about by this civilization, pollution, deforestation, rapid climate change, would almost certainly trigger a mass extinction event, a clear and dramatic shift in the fossil record. The Silurian hypothesis asks us to look for this specific combination of clues in the geological past: a sudden warming event, a carbon spike, a nitrogen anomaly, a techno-fossil layer, and a mass extinction, all happening at the same time. And here is where the thought experiment takes a haunting turn. Geologists, in their study of Earth's deep past, have already found events like this. They are called hyperthermal events. The most famous of these is the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, or PETM, which occurred around 56 million years ago. It was a period of shockingly rapid global warming. The planet's temperature soared, the oceans became acidic, and a major extinction event occurred in the deep seas, and it was marked by a massive, sudden release of carbon into the atmosphere. The official scientific explanation for the PETM and other hyperthermal events is that they were caused by immense, prolonged volcanic activity or the sudden release of methane from the seafloor, and this is almost certainly correct. But the unsettling conclusion of the Silurian hypothesis is this: the geological signature of a civilization-ending natural catastrophe is almost indistinguishable from the geological signature that a self-destructing industrial civilization would leave behind. The fingerprints of the ghost are identical to the fingerprints of nature. We may have been staring at the evidence of a forgotten industrial age for 100 years, and we would not have even known what we were looking at. The silence of the geological record may be speaking to us, but we may have been misinterpreting the language. Now, let us zoom out. Let us pull our perspective back from the layers of rock beneath our feet and look up into the silent darkness of the night sky. Our galaxy, the Milky Way, contains perhaps 400 billion stars. A great many of them are like our Sun, with planets orbiting them. The universe is over 13 billion years old, offering more than enough time for life to have emerged and evolved on countless worlds. So, as the physicist Enrico Fermi famously asked, where is everybody? If life is common, then the galaxy should be teeming with advanced, interstellar civilizations. It should be noisy. Instead, it is utterly, profoundly silent. This is the Fermi paradox, and one of its most troubling potential solutions is the concept of the Great Filter. The Great Filter is a theory that suggests that there is some kind of barrier, some immense challenge or danger that lies on the evolutionary path from simple life to a long-lasting, star-faring civilization. And this barrier is so difficult to overcome that almost no species ever makes it through. Life rises, intelligence evolves, and then it hits the filter, and it is extinguished. The terrifying question is, where on the timeline does this filter lie? Is it behind us? Perhaps the emergence of life itself, or the leap to multicellular organisms, or the evolution of intelligence, is so incredibly rare that we are one of the first and only species to have ever passed through it. This is the optimistic view. It means we are special, and the universe is ours for the taking. But there is a darker, more pessimistic view. What if the filter is still ahead of us? What if every, or almost every, advanced civilization reaches a certain point and then faces a challenge that leads to its inevitable destruction? And here, the silence of the stars and the silence of our own deep past may begin to merge. What if the Great Filter is not a single one-time event? What if it is the reset cycle itself? The filter could be a technological one. Perhaps the discovery of a power source like nuclear energy is a universal step for intelligent life, and it almost always leads to self-annihilation through warfare, as whispered in the Mahabharata. A civilization gets the power of the gods, and it uses that power to burn its world to the ground. Or, the filter could be an environmental one. Perhaps the industrial stage itself is the filter. Every civilization that reaches this point inevitably consumes its planet's resources and alters its climate so profoundly and so rapidly that a catastrophic collapse becomes unavoidable. The civilization's own success becomes the engine of its destruction, leaving behind only a carbon spike in the rock, a perfect example of the Silurian hypothesis. Or, the filter could be an external one, a predictable cosmic danger, like a nearby supernova, or a regular bombardment of comets, that periodically scours a galaxy clean of any advanced life that has risen in the quiet period between events. The resets could be a galactic-scale phenomenon. The Silurian hypothesis suggests that a civilization's brightest moment might leave only the faintest chemical ghost behind. The Great Filter suggests that this brightest moment may be the very last thing a civilization ever achieves. So, are we the first intelligent species on this planet to approach the Great Filter, or are we simply the latest in a long, forgotten line of cultures to have reached this point? A line of cultures whose stories are now written only in a thin layer of carbon, a few scattered, vitrified rocks, and a collection of myths that we dismiss as fantasy. The silence of the universe and the silence in our geological record may be one and the same. They may be the sound of the Great Filter at work. The story of the reset may not just be the secret history of our planet, but the tragic, repeating story of life everywhere. And as we stand here, in our own time, holding the very technologies that could constitute a filter, nuclear weapons, artificial intelligence, the power to engineer our own climate, we are no longer just quiet observers of a mystery of the past. We are living it. The filter may be right in front of us. And the quietest, and most important, question of all is whether we, this time, will find a way through the silence. Our long journey through the quiet and the deep is now coming to an end. We began in the silence of our own recorded history, and we followed its whispers down into the darkness. We drifted through the streets of drowned cities, asleep beneath the waves. We held in our minds the image of impossible maps, charts of a world that should not have been known. We listened to the echoes of a global dream, a shared memory of a great flood that washed the world clean. We stood in the shadow of stone libraries whose language we have forgotten, and we examined the forensic clues of lost technologies and a war that may have burned a world to ash. We have followed the trail of a secret river of knowledge, flowing through the dark channels of hidden history, and we have zoomed out to see our own story reflected in the silent, waiting expanse of the cosmos. We have walked through a gallery of ghosts, the ghosts of lost worlds, of forgotten science, and of a humanity that may have risen and fallen, again and again, like a breath drawn and released by the planet itself. And now, we return. We ascend from the depths, from the past, and back into the present moment, back to the quiet of this room. But we do not return unchanged. For the whispers of that forgotten world do not only speak of the past, they echo, with a haunting and profound resonance, in our world today. The memory of the Great Flood, of the rising waters that swallowed a world, comes to us now not just as a myth, but as a forecast. We see our own polar ice caps weeping into the sea. We watch our own coastlines, where the majority of our own civilization now lives, retreat before a slowly rising tide. The waters are rising again. The first part of the ancient cycle is in motion right before our eyes. The testimony of the Iron Thunderbolt, of the weapon that was as bright as 10,000 suns, is not just a poetic horror from an ancient epic. It is a description of a power that we, in our own age, unlocked and unleashed. The arsenals of our own world still hold these weapons, thousands of them, sleeping messengers of a death so vast it could create its own winter and poison the very seed of life. The fire that burned the last world is still waiting for a command. The idea of a great filter, of a challenge that every advanced civilization must face, no longer feels like a distant, abstract theory about alien worlds. It feels like a diagnosis of our own. We are now grappling with the very challenges that may have constituted the filters of the past: a changing climate, the risk of self-annihilation, and the creation of new intelligences and technologies whose consequences we cannot foresee. We are standing before the same great test. What then is the meaning of our journey tonight? Is it a story of inevitable doom? A reminder that we are simply the next cast of characters in a tragedy that is destined to repeat forever? Perhaps. But perhaps there is another way to hear this story. Previous civilizations, if they existed, may have faced their end in ignorance. They may not have known they were part of a cycle. They may have been the first to unlock the atom, the first to alter their climate, and they would have had no warning from the past, no precedent to guide them. But we are different. We may be the first civilization in this planet's history to be self-aware of the cycle itself. We are the ones who have unearthed Göbekli Tepe. We are the ones who have X-rayed the Antikythera mechanism. We are the ones who have read the carbon spikes in the ancient ice. We are the ones who have collected the 500 stories of the flood. The ghosts of all the previous cycles are, for the first time, speaking to the present. The Great Library is not entirely unreadable. We are beginning to decipher the language. And so, we are left with a choice that perhaps no world before us has ever had. We can choose to see these stories as nothing more than entertaining fictions, curiosities to be dismissed before we return to the familiar story of our own unique and uninterrupted ascent. Or, we can choose to see them as a profound and urgent inheritance, a warning, a lesson, and a blueprint, left for us by the silent, watching memory of the Earth itself. The story of the reset is the great bell of history. For millennia, it has been ringing, but we have been too deafened by the noise of our own progress to hear it. Now, in the quiet of the night, we can finally begin to make out its toll. It is not a funeral bell for what has been lost. It is an alarm bell for our future. It reminds us that our place on this earth is not a right, but a privilege, and that the privilege is conditional. It reminds us that we are temporary, that our greatest achievements are fragile, and that we are part of something far, far older and larger than our own brief moment in the Sunday. The choice, now, is ours, to listen or to ignore, to remember or to repeat. And so our journey ends. The symphony of silence continues, its notes echoing in the deep chambers of time. We have listened for a while, and now it is time to rest. Let these great and quiet questions settle. Let them become a part of your dreams, for in the morning, a new day begins, and what chapter we choose to write in it is a story that is still our own. Sleep well.